We are here today with Darlene Senger, the Republican candidate for Comptroller. We appreciate you being here today with us, and we ask you to start by providing an opening statement on why you're the best candidate for this position.
Good, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say today is September 11th, 2018, and it was 17 years ago today that our country was changed forever. It had to do with the September 11th 2001 incident, and again, that was something that unified our country. I just want to take a moment to reflect for and remember those who died, those who served to protect us and the family members of both. So just wanted to do that to start. Yeah, so I'm running for Comptroller, and I'll give you a little history on why I'm doing this. Almost 4 years ago, Judy Bartopinka passed away, and she won this seat in November, and then she passed away in December, and Leslie Munger was appointed to fill a 4-year term. The Democrats said special election in 2 years. It didn't qualify for a 4-year term. Leslie lost that by a smidgen. It was a presidential year, and Susana Mendoza won it. So I'm running to bring that back to Republican organization again. Yeah, I'm running also because, politics aside, I've got the criteria to be Comptroller. And right now, my opponent's running she wants to run for the mayor of Chicago. So I'd like to serve as Comptroller. I've got a financial background, worked for a bank in the trust department, worked as a pension consultant, also worked as the CFO for the Workers' Compensation Commission for almost 2 years, and I understand municipal government and state government. Some of the things I like to accomplish as Comptroller is that the office manages millions of warrants each year. That process needs to be done by a third-party, independent party. I want to get politics out of the payment of things. I also want to combine the Comptroller's office and the Treasurer's office. That's a constitutional amendment. I'm an advocate for a constitutional amendment for pensions, and I'm also an advocate for adding more transparency, including pension debt, basically bonding debt, and municipal pension debt, to the Comptroller's website to give you a really full brush, first-hand picture of what the state's really about and what you as a taxpayer are indebted. So that's some of the policies I like to see done. Get a report card going on good, showing government. And then finally, what I like to show also is that there's more to the outstanding unpaid bills. There's also what the governor's offices do as agencies, and many of them have actually cut and done some really good things, so I'd like to share that with the public too. So the Comptroller is the chief financial officer for the state and also the provider of information to the public, which I totally agree with.
Okay. I just want to go really quick to your opening. You said the current Comptroller, Susana Mendoza, wants to run for mayor of Chicago. She's not announced that, I guess. How can you state that as a fact at this point?
Well, she hasn't announced it, but she hasn't denied it. So I'd like to see her come out and say, no, I'm not interested in the mayor run, and if elected, will serve 4 years fully. And she definitely has not denied it.
Okay. You touched on this in your intro a little bit, but I would like you to share with our readers and our viewers a little bit about your background in finances and how you think those would help you as a Comptroller.
Looking at the role of the Comptroller and glancing at some other states, some states actually do require some financial background as qualification for the job. Illinois requires you to be 25 years old and a citizen of the state of Illinois, and I have an MBA in finance. I worked for the First National Bank of Chicago managing a department of 30 people. And then I also worked for a company called SCI. We were institutional pension consultants. I was the vice president of product planning for that. So as my role as a chief financial officer for the Workers' Compensation Commission, the qualification was to have a CPA or equivalent background, and I qualified for the job. So I have a good understanding of what a chief financial officer should be.
Okay. You also come with experience as a member of the Illinois House.
Yep.
How do you think that would help you in the statewide constitutional office?
It's going to help a lot, particularly when it comes to understanding budgeting and the financing pieces of the budget. I was on several appropriations committees, and I will work with the General Assembly to educate them, particularly those who are new, in regards to how the budget process works and what your decisions mean to the longer-term consequence of, paying bills and running a comptroller's agency.
How would you rate the job of the current comptroller, Susana Mendoza?
Here's how I would rank it. I mean, she's done some good work with her transparency bills that I am in agreement with. I think transparency is something that we should continue to do, and that's where the policies I just mentioned I like to see put forth. Also, where the problem I have with her is more the aspect that she's using it for a political agenda versus my proposal to say, let's not pay bills with any political agenda. If we need to send it to a third party, let's go that route. It's and I know firsthand, working for the governor's office, that she's been bashing the governor, and she's using it for her own. She's using it for political agendas for herself and for Democrats, and Madigan and JB.
Okay. One of the main struggles the comptroller's office has had to deal with in recent years is the backlog of bills. There's more bills to pay than there is money to pay them. The office has essentially been a triage center. How would you prioritize what bills are paid first? Because that backlog is still there. It's still in the billions.
Yeah, the backlog is still there. It's still in the billions. Here's the solution to that going forward, and it's pretty simple. I mean, number one, we need to pass budgets that we can fully pay every year, and then don't do spending appropriations that spend more than what we're bringing in. So there's the need to look at that backlog. There's a need to consider that backlog as we go through next year's budgeting process to pay them down. And then there's also the need, which we should really look at, is the penalty pay components that are expensive to everything. I know, again, being part of appropriation budgets, that many times you've got vendors who pretty much calculate penalty pay as part of their budgets, and we need to stop that. We need to reduce that penalty pay.
Would you have advocated borrowing to pay down the backlog, which is what was done?
That was a good thing to do.
Okay.
Again, you had a 12% cost of the backlog, the interest on the backlog, and we borrowed at this was GOMB to the borrowing. I believe it was down to, 4 or under percent. So you swapped from a high interest rate to a lower interest rate. That's not a bad thing to do. Is it good practice to basically add to the debt that the state has, given we have so much? No, but in times like this, it was not a bad thing to do.
Okay. What type of changes would you want to bring to the office regarding technology?
I would like to go back to the system that Mendoza was first to step up to, was the SAP system, and it was basically replacing the COBOL systems that were there. As the Chief Financial Officer for the Workers' Compensation Commission, all the agencies were in queue to transfer to these new financial systems. Okay. That was a very important, very significant thing to do, because now we're all speaking one language in regards to our finances, and that's not being done today throughout all the agencies. There's 40 different systems.
That's what I was going to ask. How many systems are being used?
I think there was some 40 different types of languages being used. So it gets everybody on the same page speaking financially, and then it also gives you a lot more transparency, so all the stuff is instantaneous. And then secondly, and most importantly, what it does for everyone is it gives you a chance to use that data in a way that you now can make decisions from it, both for the General Assembly and the budgeting organizations, Comptroller and Treasurer. So that needs to be done. Mendoza, as soon as she took office, kicked that out the door, and the agencies are still going through that motion. So that definitely needs to be brought back again.
I think the cost is part of the problem with that. How would you pay for that system?
The cost, here's part of the problem with the cost. It wasn't this year, but it's several years ago. The agencies were preparing for that cost and budgeting for the cost. The General Assembly cut some of that cost for various reasons. So again, this is if you think about it, and everybody says cost, but I like to quantify the savings long-term that would be had by converting to this new system. If you look at a Cobalt program, that's been functioning for 40 years, and if you look at what you need to run that thing, you can't even find people to take care of that stuff anymore. So that's pretty cost intensive, and there's a lot of time because you've got a lot of fingers and people on the system to make it work. So again, if you look at the savings from a technology perspective, tell me what company would still want to have a Cobalt program working for their financial systems.
I just want to clarify, Cobalt is what we're currently using? That's what we're currently using, Cobalt?
Let me put it this way. Everybody has different systems. I believe that's the system the Comptroller was on.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, not every agency is on, they're all on different systems.
Okay. What about, oh my goodness, question just came out of, fell out of my head. Sorry about that. How would you, what type of cost savings are we going to see if you implemented these systems you would like to do?
I don't know that offhand. That has to be quantified throughout the whole state.
Okay. Very good. Let's talk about some of the priorities you stated on your campaign website. The first is to save taxpayer dollars. You stated by ending high interest payouts to Illinois vendors. How would you work to accomplish this?
Well, we talked a little bit about, again, reducing the cost of the penalty pay. That's where a lot of the cost comes in. I talked a little bit about making sure we get a third-party person out there to make sure that not only are we not partisan in paying the bills, but that we're using the right vendors to pay bills. And as I spoke also, when it comes to prioritizing the taxpayer, let's give the taxpayer the information they really need and to understand what debt the state is in, and give them the ability to also give a thumbs up or thumbs down on consolidating the two offices. This is something that is not a function of the General Assembly, but it's a function of the voter. It has to be put on the ballot for a thumbs up or thumbs down on consolidation, so let's give the taxpayer a chance to do that. Another priority you stated is you want to end the politics of payment, and you touched on that a little bit earlier. So can you provide an example where you believe an insider or donor shouldn't be at the front of the line for state payment? It's, this is, here's how it works, and this is what is concerning to me, and this is why we need a third party on everything. Everyone's in line for their payments. And I'm hearing stories, and I was in Danville, and I heard the stories that when Leslie Munger was in office, we were getting, this is a township, we were getting our monies late, but eventually we would get it. Now, Susana's in office. I call, one of her staff is telling me that, it's been 18 months since you've been paid, and it's political type of thing. So that's a situation. There's an example of what's been going on. I know also that the Comptroller's office, when you set up a warrant, is the pre-audit for the warrant to make the payment. And that person who is saying you're free to go to pay or not has control over you're ready or you're not. So again, there could be politics paid there. I know that firsthand, working for the Workers' Compensation Commission, that I had brought in a new vendor, had a hard time getting that vendor up and going. Don't know how long it took them to get paid because I left and worked for the governor's office. But again, there's that sort of having your fingers in the process. I'd like to see that removed and just say, hey, everybody's treated the same, and this is how you pay bills.
Okay. You also list you'd like to innovate the office. You noted greater innovation will increase transparency, reduce overall cost, but there weren't a lot of details on your website as to what your vision is there. So share with us what you're thinking.
That goes back to, again, more that can be done when we convert to the new financial systems. And then it goes back also in regards to my thoughts on, having the Comptroller as not only a monitor of all the outstanding bills, but also the monitor of, here's our pension obligations out there, the unfunded liability debt, the bonding debt. And what I'd like to see, because they do this already, the Comptroller is the auditors for municipalities and townships, and they know what the scorecards are for those municipalities in regards to their unfunded pension liabilities, so it could be done simplistically to give that person sitting at home paying their taxes the ability to say, this is how much I owe as a total.
The Comptroller does do a lot of, you can go to that website for those financial reports you're talking about for municipalities. Do you think there's any ways that you can, I guess, is there any ways you would change the way it's collected or shared with the public?
You know, there's better ways that could be shared with the public and make it more understandable and readable by the public. You know, again, they're in financial format now, so let's do the narrative, which people understand, and then let's make it more readily available and transparent.
You don't think it's readily available? I mean, you can go now and
you can go now and see it, but you got to be a real wonk to go in there and do it. So let's make it so it's more user friendly.
How would you make it more, user friendly? I guess maybe since I know what some of these reports are and what I'm looking for, how would you make it so the average layperson
put it in a format where it's resonating as a narrative and a story versus a spreadsheet. So the scorecard, you can say, hey, for example, I'm a former city councilman out of Naperville. This is where Naperville is with their finances. Last year they were A, this year they're B. They went up or down, improved or whatever. So put it in a narrative that people understand.
Is there the staffing available to do that? Because I'm guessing what goes up now is pretty much what's submitted.
What goes up now is pretty much what's submitted. But if you look at the, if you look at this agency websites, that's a function of, putting the narrative on the website that people understand. So you don't necessarily need more hands to do it, but you're basically using the web and communications through technology to get out there and communicate.
Okay. Would you be in favor of penalties if those governments didn't provide information in a timely manner? There's times you can go there and it'll just say this report has not been filed, and there's really not a ton of penalties for a municipality or a school board that doesn't file it on time.
I don't. Here's the whole purpose of the report is for consumer information, for taxpayer information. It's not to reprimand those who may be up or down, but give you the information on for example, if you live somewhere where they're moving backwards instead of forwards. What I don't agree with, though, is, and I know there was a lot of this as I was traveling around the state, I was hearing from particularly a lot of the townships about how they were being asked to change from a cash basis to accrual basis of accounting, and that was a hardship on them, and the General Assembly passed some things to rectify that. So I'm not taking a community that's already had a lot of hardship more hard, but again, this is for those who are participating in tax paying to say, here's where you are.
Okay, you said you'd want to have a narrative for that would be easy to understand. With 7,000 units of government, all of them very different. They don't necessarily have the same funds, the same sources of income. Who would determine what that narrative is? Who would write it, or determine what's in it? Because I don't know that you'd have apples to apples comparison.
Yeah,
every time.
that all have to be thought out. You have to look at that at a way and think it out and put it in a framework that you can make sense. What direction are you moving in? Your scorecard last year was up, now it's going down. Like bond ratings, things move you, so you get something that sits overall and it's moving in either one up or down kind of situation.
Okay. You mentioned earlier you would like to see the offices of the state treasurer and comptroller combined. Why would you like that? Why is that good?
This is a policy that's been out there for quite some time. Judy Bartopinka wanted to see it done with Rutherford. Mm-hmm. I think it was in 2012. The Senate unanimously said this is something we want to see done. This is smaller government, and I'm in favor of smaller government. And again, this is something that is not decided by me, and my opinions is by the taxpayers. So it's more than saying I want to see it done, but I want the taxpayer, when they have the opportunities, to be able to have their opportunity granted to them to decide whether or not they want to consolidate or not. Mendoza and Madigan have blocked this continuously, and that's what I say is more wrong than not, is to block something that you should have a right to vote on.
Do you think, I guess, where do you see efficiencies happening by combining these two offices?
You know, here's what goes on today. Out of the 50 states, there's Illinois and 4 other states that have the 2 offices of comptroller and treasurer. Out of the remaining states, there's only 1 that has a comptroller office. The rest just have a treasurer's office, and they do the functions under one constitutional office. Some have not even a constitutional office. It's a function under administration to say I pay the bills, I invest the money. So we're rare here when it comes to how other states function. With both constitutional offices, it's expensive to have more than one constitutional office because you've got elections and you've got different staff and everything else. So this is best practices followed by other states in the country, and they do some very good things with one office and more things with one office. Indiana's got some really good stuff that they do over there. And it's a treasurer over there.
I'll play devil's advocate and say having a treasurer and a comptroller provides you with some checks and balances so that just one office is not in charge of the money. Do you agree or disagree with that?
You know, I disagree with that, and I'm not to say that there isn't errors that are happening throughout the state of Illinois, but if you look at why we have the 2 constitutionals, which makes no sense at all, this happened with something that happened in 1950 with some corruption and embezzlement of funds, and then in 1970 we opened the Constitution and said 20 years later we need to have 2 constitutional offices just to keep the 2 from happening. There's still corruption going on in Illinois and issues that are happening even with the state level. So this is, again, the argument that you need the 2 separated for, to keep things from being a conflict, between investment and the rest. I mean, with technologies today, companies don't function that way, and the state shouldn't either, and other states function with one.
What type of savings do you think could be realized from this?
It's previous administrations have quantified savings of 12 to 14 million. Now, that was done quite a while ago. I think it was 8 years ago when they put that together, so there could be more savings done today. It's right off the top, you've got the savings of not having to put the 2 ballots on the 2 constitutionals on the ballot every 4 years for election type of thing. So there's things that could be saved.
But that money wouldn't come from their budgets. That would come from State Board of Elections.
Well, it's still taxpayer money to do.
Okay.
I mean, that's the bottom line through the whole thing. So it's just, again, it doesn't, it's cost, we know it's costing us more money to have the 2, and it's better practice to have one.
Do you have specific studies you can point to? I've not seen these studies where the $12 to $14 million. So
yeah, I haven't. I would like to see a current study put together to say this is what the savings would be, and I also like to see not only in that current study to say this is what you save, but this, by combining the 2, is what you can, in best practice, also do, as other states are doing. And here's another thing that I've looked at, and this is Indiana's form of working the 2, it's a treasurer's office. They do a couple things in regards to investing for public safety funds. They basically consolidate all their investing in that one office and then save the locals the funding of paying for administrative costs and fees and whatever for investing. So again, it's not the unfunded liability, but it's consolidating for investing, police and fire into one pot.
But
the question always comes up with savings, but let's talk about best practices, and that's what I'd like to see done here. Is let's really come up with the best practice for this function. The function is pretty simple. Like I said, some states don't even have a constitutional office doing it. It's under the guise of a administrator. So one's paying the bills and one's investing the money, and let's look at ways we can do that better.
Just going back to this $12 to $14 million, can you point us and our readers to where we can find that study? I've not seen that study. I'm not familiar with where this is that recommends those savings 8 years ago.
Yeah, I can't point you to that study.
Okay.
I can point you to where you're looking at the same places that I've gone to and
Okay.
where it's been quoted in from press from previous administrations.
Okay, previous.
Yeah.
So Topinka's, is that
Topinka,
particularly?
yeah.
Okay.
Kwame had one, Topeka had one. I mean, it's out there.
Okay. I just want to make sure we can do that. How would you go about, it would take a constitutional amendment to get the comptroller and treasurer made into one office. So how would you get that in front of voters? Would you want the General Assembly to do it? Would you want a petition ballot? How would you hope for that?
You know, the first thing is just to get it out and be able to get it on. So I'm not going to be a stickler on exactly how it gets done. I don't know the details. I know a constitutional amendment doesn't require the governor's signature, but it goes on the ballot. So I'm not, whatever makes it simpler for the person who's making the decision, the voter, is the way I'd like to go about it.
So if you were elected, would you be someone who's advocating for putting this on the ballot in some way?
Oh, yeah.
And would you would you prefer to work with the General Assembly for them that's arguably the easier way to get it on the ballot, because, with a petition drive, you need hundreds of thousands of signatures on it to get it on there. And so what would be the preferred way you would do that if elected?
The preferred way is to have the General Assembly pass it. It's been passed out of the Senate. 55-0, and let's get the House to take the action to do it.
Okay. When you're going around talking to people, is there interest in them seeing these offices combined?
You know what? I am asking: is there interest in smaller government? And that's what this is. So this is a function of we have 7,000 units of government in the state of Illinois, and there's 2 of them that you should have the ups and downs to say put together or not. So that's my advocacy, is to basically give the voter that option, that choice.
Okay. We've had a year of some fiscal stability. The impasse has ended, and this year's budget passed with very little drama for that, but we did have 2 years with no budget. Where do you place the onus of the budget impasse? Like, whose fault was that?
It is my understanding, and I lived that because I was the chief financial officer for the Workers' Compensation Commission when we were functioning without a budget and without appropriations. So I know what we had to do to manage that, and we did. But the frustration here is, the General Assembly never did pass anything to give to the governor to sign. And that's the chicken and the egg thing back and forth, there were budgets voted on, but nothing ever got passed to the governor for signature.
So equal blame, one side, party-wise, I guess, where's the... So a lot of people were, as you know from the workers' comp, a lot of people were hurt by that impasse, and where would you place the onus on the blame for that?
That there's no blame. It's kind of, we passed a budget now. It took a while to get there, and we passed a budget. So I don't know if it's a function of calling a blame per se, but it's a function of saying we need to debate what direction the state is going in. And anytime you run into some very, 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 very difficult changes to be had, you're going to run into things that aren't going to happen smoothly all the time. I worked hard on a example of something I still believe is the biggest problem in the state, and it took us years to get there, but when I was working on the pension bill, the SB 1, it took years to craft that. We went up and down, various ways, sideways. We finally, bipartisanly, got something done that would move the state in a better direction. Unfortunately, the court kicked it out. But there's examples, again, when you have to go through some serious changes, and there's 2 sides of opinions on how that change should be had and what the outcome could be, you're not going to see things run all the time perfectly. I believe a lot of the, let me put it this way, you're never going to solve a problem or make a change and move in a better direction, and we definitely need to do all the above and move in a better direction until you know there's a problem and recognize there's a problem. And this governor did recognize that there's a problem in Illinois. We have, we are still in the mode where we have structural deficits in our budgets and plannings. We have inefficiencies in a lot of our systems. And we have basically another governor that's running on a tax increase as his platform, which is why why Illinois is way behind other states when it comes to having the economic benefits of the economy that we're seeing elsewhere. So that's where the problems are.
You brought up pensions. What changes would you like to see in pensions? And you brought up both the statewide funds as well as some of the municipal ones. Where would you like to see us make changes in pensions?
There's a lot of different ways to go about solving the pension problem. So it isn't a matter of coming up with solutions. There's many ways to do that. It's a matter of political wherewithal to make it happen. The courts kicked the last one out until something there gets changed. I would say to move it forward at all, and again, there's a multitude of ways we can get there, is we need to have a constitutional amendment to basically get the clause more flexible in regards to making changes.
So the earned benefits, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So you would change the Constitution?
I would change the Constitution.
Okay. What about at the municipal level? You mentioned that as well. What changes would you like to see there? This
isn't so much a change, but this is, here's what I see in reality today, and Harvey's a good example of it. You've got municipalities that they can no longer pay for public safety because they're paying for their pensions, and that's what happened in Harvey. So we need to give them the ability to get out from under that. Bankruptcy is probably something that is a good tool for some to have in hand. I know there's been experience in the state actually through some school districts that just totally go under that. They don't get bankrupt, but the state can take them over and kind of reconstitute how they work type of thing. So we need those municipalities that are really in bad shape need the basically the pathway out to say, I've got to totally start over again, do a do-over. Let's reconfigure how we're structured entirely, including our pensions, and then get our feet back on the ground to move forward.
Okay. Do you think the state should be able to declare bankruptcy?
I don't think the state can.
It can't.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying,
can.
do you think the law should be changed so that it could?
Here's what was kind of in the preamble on SB 1 when we first put that together. We didn't say the state. We basically were spelling out, and I don't have all the detail there, but we were spelling out that the state was moving in a direction where the pension cost was taking over so much of the budget, and it still is today. It's 25% on your tax dollar. For every dollar you pay, 25% goes into pension and healthcare cost, that it would squeeze out everything else. And that language in the first quarter of Senate Bill 1 wasn't saying we were bankrupt, but it was basically saying we're kind of like Detroit that does go bankrupt because this is taking the life out of everything.
Okay. Back in December of 2017, when you were working for Governor Rauner, you wrote that we can maybe tie this back to Duckworth regarding the Legionnaire's disease deaths at the Quincy Veterans Home. Why is that a suggestion you made? Why do you think that was valid?
So here's the outcome on the whole thing. The thing's being rebuilt and being redone, and the problem will be solved once and for all.
But I mean, what led you to send that email out to the governor and his top staffers?
So we're learning that there's a problem for the first time, and Legionnaires was found under the governor's auspice, and My question, and we were looking, first thing you do, and we asked this question, we go, well, let's go back and look at the pneumonia cases that have been had over time, and I think they started tracking them in 2007 or 2008 from what I understand. And there were some situations where there were even higher numbers of death back then. So I probably should have used the term, let's go back and look at other administrations. I mentioned another name who was head of the administration instead, and it had nothing to do except for the fact of, which we did the next day, let's go back and look at the cases that were tracked. And they just started, like I said, tracking cases, I think it was 2007.
Okay, 2007. Track cases. Do you think you owe an apology to Senator Duckworth for making that statement?
I don't think, again, it's a lot of what has been done with that is there was questioning whether or not that was a statement or if it was a function of my policy work that I was doing to say, let's go back and look at the history.
Okay. So have you apologized to her? Have you discussed it with the senator at all, that statement?
She's
Okay.
haven't talked to me, I haven't talked to her. And again, there was some questioning on whether or not that was even foreseeable because I was doing policy work at the time.
Okay. Some of the changes that you would need to, or you would like to see, reforms you'd like to see, would require legislative approval from the General Assembly. How would you go about building support for your priorities?
This is where my strength actually is. I worked, as we were talking before, I worked with the General Assembly on the biggest problem the state had to do with the pension problem, and I'll tell you how it got done, and this is how it works going forward. It has to do with trust with the members, and it's all about trust. I just ran into Representative Necritz, who worked with me long and hard on the pension problem, and I ran into her in Des Moines, and we still, we gave each other a big hug and said, what we did was really significant, and we both agree how we got it done is that we trusted each other. We weren't going to stab each other in the back or go out to, say, hey, I know what you're going to do now type of thing. We actually trusted each other. And when we disagreed, we would pause, we would stop, we would listen, and we would get back to the table again. And that's how you need to work this stuff going forward. Here's something kind of ironic on all this. We just did this again with education reform, another real big to do with trust. Again, you get the right people and you work with them, and you need to trust one another. When you're a freshman legislator, you go through boot camp, and that's one of the things they teach you in boot camp is your word is your word. So if you tell somebody you're not going to do something or do something, that's your word. You can change your opinion, but your word is your word, and that's earning trust. And that's how I'll work with the General Assembly. That's how I worked with them when I was legislative chief of staff for the governor. And that's how you get respect, and that's how you move things going forward. The education bill was also SB 1. So I keep telling everybody, if you want to do some major reform in Springfield, call it SB 1 and get it out of the gate. But that's
I think
the key.
It didn't become a different bill? Was an SB 1
it was
vetoed, and then they had to redo another one?
It was, but the bill that
The original bill, yeah.
was Senate Bill 1, yeah.
Okay.
And the pension bill was original Senate Bill 1.
If you are elected and it is a Democratic General Assembly and Democratic Governor's Office, which is a possibility, do you think you can build that coalition that you need to make any reforms you want move forward?
Yeah, I do. And if you look at what I'd like to see done with the office, we talked a little bit about, we got even greater transparency than what has been done already by Mendoza, and she's taken it forward on transparency. That's something both sides of the aisle agree upon. So I would, again, I would hope and I would think that moving forward, when it comes to better tools, greater transparency, we're in favor of that, both sides of the aisle.
Okay. All right. We thank you for meeting with us today, and we invite you to give a brief closing statement as to why you believe you should be the next comptroller for the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I'm asking for your vote as comptroller and your support here, as the paper here for several reasons. Again, I bring a lot to the table in regards to experience, a lot to the table in regards to knowing how the state works and the General Assembly works. And I'm also someone that, if elected, will be there 4 years. I'll guarantee that. Unlike the person I'm running against right now, who is considering a run for mayor, and again, she hasn't said no, I would not consider a run for anything else but to serve the taxpayer and the state of Illinois.